several reasons why democracy promotion is often seen as good. Democracies do not go to war with each other, mostly. Today, America's main threats all come from authoritarian regimes or collapsed states. However, this may not always be true. For example, a democratic Palestine or a democratic Egypt is not necessarily any more likely to remain at peace with Israel or with the United States as Israel's ally. A mostly democratic Pakistan has not stayed at peace with a democratic India. And the general peace in Europe since the end of World War II may have less to do with the fact that Western Europe is democratic and more to do with the fact that for 40 years they were all really, really scared of the Soviet Union, and they knew they had to have us happy to not be destroyed by the Soviet Union. Second, democracies are better trading partners, mostly. Democracies are better trading partners because they're more likely to play by the rules. Things like copyrights and patent violations. Also, while I was on the way here listening to the talk about China and elections, they mentioned that just this week in a new car trade show, a Chinese company has debuted a new truck. Great new truck they've been planning that just happens to look exactly like a Ford 150. Can't imagine how that happened. Can't imagine how that happened, right? Of course, China's not a democracy. But the fact that India hasn't stopped India from preventing the widespread copyright and pirating abuses of American products or European products. Third, in the long run, democracies make better allies, mostly. Alliances are sustained by public opinions in democracies. Autocracies rest on one person. If that person dies or is overthrown, the country might not be our ally anymore. That's our problem in Egypt right now. This is true, but only if public opinion in the other country actually supports an alliance with the United States. Again, think about Egypt. For 30 years, the United States had a working alliance with Egypt because we had an autocrat that we could work with. He wasn't a nice person. He was, in fact, a very not nice person. But he didn't go to war with Israel or with us as long as we maintained some sort of friendship, and we had a little bit of ability to pressure him to do certain things. Now, Egypt may become a democracy. It may not. But if it does, it's difficult to see how it will remain a working ally of the United States, given that the interests of its democratically elected officials will arguably not line up with the United States because their interests will be aligned with their population, which does not like us very much. Diamond suggests that there's a need for modesty and restraint in U.S. foreign policy. We don't know enough about other countries to intervene intelligently. See Iraq. This argument says that a democracy is a very difficult thing to achieve. Each country must find its own path and pace. The question is, how? How can a country find its own path to democracy? It is very rare for totalitarian governments to just collapse and become democracies. Totalitarian governments collapse into other totalitarian governments, sometimes into democracies. But we're not really sure why or how to make a better track record on those sorts of areas. So, what can the U.S. do? Force. We're running about 50-50 on this one. Worked pretty well with Japan and Germany. Not so well with Afghanistan and Iraq. Nation building, post-conflict democracy. This can be done, but it's expensive, long-term, and time-consuming. There are some useful examples. Worked pretty well in El Salvador, Mozambique, Liberia, and East Timor. We might be about to try this again in South Sudan. This is a country that has just won its independence from North Sudan. Diplomacy. It's a powerful tool, but it's rarely compelling to autocratic leaders, certainly not based on moral or practical logic. The only change comes by legitimate threats. There are examples of this working. Mexico used to be a one-party government. Taiwan, South Korea. It's less useful where ties with the West are not as strong, like in, say, North Korea. Sanctions and aid. Sanctions often don't work well, either because the country is too big to have an effect, like China, the country has too much oil revenue, Libya, or too few links to the United States, North Korea or Burma. Sanctions work by inflicting pain on the ruling elite, which typically requires inflicting pain on the regular people as well. Think about something like Cuba. Sometimes sanctions can be more targeted, and can freeze the wealth or travel grants of political elites, but in general it's difficult to do. I'm skeptical of sanctions. They are often a way for democracies to vent frustration, but they rarely achieve very much. Cuba would be an example of this. On the other hand, it's often unclear of what else could be done. In general, I think it's important for the United States to be as consistent as possible. If we're going to give dissidents support, we should actually support dissidents. In practice, we do this very haphazardly. meaning that autocratic regimes have little reason to think we will follow through on threats, and dissidents have little reason to think we will follow through on promises to support them. Just in the last few years, we completely ignored significant uprisings in Iran and Syria, and yet we engaged in a war in Libya, accidentally allying ourselves with factions of al-Qaeda. Why one and not the other? Well, I have no idea what happened with that. There is nothing wrong with using a variety of tools, from diplomacy to sanctions and aid, to some nation building, and even at times to force. But too frequently, it is not clear what the end goal of an intervention is and what we would consider a success. We often seem too quick to believe autocracies have reformed and reward them for essentially not engaging in bad behavior rather than actually doing something good. So, for example, Hillary Clinton is about to go to Burma. Why is she going to Burma? Because they decided not to kill an opposition leader running for office. They haven't actually decided they're going to let him run, and they're not letting him leave the country. They just decided not to kill him. Well, that's better than nothing. Right? But it's not particularly good. In practice, we spend too much money in large grants to government that often never gets to the people in need, and too little on things that support those legitimately in need, or to support dissidents in autocratic countries. So what is democracy good for? I'll leave you with 3 short quotes. The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. It took some of you a little longer. Yes, if you've ever seen Jay Leno's, 5 minutes on the street, the average person. ISI, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, every year does a survey of graduates of Ivy League institutions on their civic knowledge. And generally, less than 30% of them can answer basic questions like, what was the Declaration of Independence for? Right? So, take that for what you will. Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those others that have been tried from time to time. What is democracy good for? Finally, man's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. Reinhold Niebuhr. So that's what democracy is good for. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, Dr. Verbois, thank you very much for covering a very complex topic in a great way to really spur our thought. And as I said before, when we started this series, that only 30% of our country, by surveys, are really even interested in or engaged in foreign policy, foreign affairs. And it's really up to us as we get closer to the 2012 elections that we do stay engaged and that we not only here but throughout our community understand the issues and the major national security issues that are out there today. And this is certainly one of them. What policies should our government have as we move forward, especially dealing with the Middle East and the Arab Spring? Now I'll talk to you later about programs we do have, but if you have not registered yet to come listen to Robin Wright, the author of Rock the Kasbah, a best-selling book about the Arab Spring that was just recently published, that's going to be this Thursday at our distinguished speaker dinner, and giving her the award from the World Affairs Council for the Global Citizen of the Year that we do annually will be Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who's coming in from Afghanistan to do this. And also, there is no one individual that knows more about that region than he does, being the ambassador to not only Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Lebanon. He knows that region very well and will be here Thursday. So if you haven't registered, all the materials are out there. Please do. That's something not to miss this year as we move forward towards the elections. What should our policies be towards this region of the world and promotion of democracy? With that, why don't we take our traditional break, come back in 15 minutes, and